Welcome to our second session, BFM Workshop Basics. And after looking at some fundamentals in aircraft performance, we are now going to look at BFM fundamentals. For those of you that don't know what BFM stands for Basic Fighter Maneuvers, and it's basically concepts and techniques that help you win a so-called merge in a one-on-one situation. So BFM only covers 1 versus 1. As soon as multiple aircraft are involved on either side, you would call this ACM, Advanced or Air Combat Maneuvering. Okay. So additionally to the other resources that I've already linked in this PDF file that you should all have available, as a reminder here, there is a thread here, where you can find this material. We are currently looking at not this one, but this one, obviously. And inside, as I said, this material, you have those links. I can highly recommend this playlist. This is a real Air Force pilot, not sure still active or retired, but he teaches a lot of things in BFM, ACM, and also ground attack and other stuff. BVR is currently coming up, the way the Air Force teaches it. So it's a very good playlist that I highly recommend. Are you showing something? Yeah, I should. Oh, not yet. Okay. Yep, alright, then we are sharing the screen now. Now you should see it, yeah. So these resources here. So the first playlist, that's why I listed it at the top. It's a very good one. The other resources are great too. Now this is more focused on World War II, the Air Combat Library, and a lot of these videos are in IL-2 not 1946, IL-2 grade vessels, but the concepts still apply. So they are all worth watching. But if I was to choose one, I think this one is the best. Okay. Now, before we get into the thick of it, when we talk about BFM, dogfighting, maneuvering, we need to understand why we are doing this. What is our goal, right? We need to have a goal when we maneuver. And our main goal is to survive in the first place, and ideally, if we can, to eliminate the enemy. But survival is usually the first priority. And hence, our maneuvering is based on that priority. First survive, then eliminate the threat. Sometimes they go hand in hand. Sometimes eliminating the threat means that you survive, obviously, ultimately. But yeah, always keep that in mind. And when we know what we are actually doing, or for what we are actually fighting, we could get into other stuff like how do we eliminate the threat. These are our sub goals, like become offensive, get into a good position, deploy our weapons, and so on and so forth, right? These are all sub goals of our ultimate goal to survive the merge and eliminate the threat. Now, a merge by definition is when two aircraft, now it's just language, merge, so basically they fly past one another or are in close proximity to one another. They identify each other as hostile, and then they try and shoot each other down. That is essentially a merge. Other terminology would be dogfight, and the techniques that you employ to win that scenario or situation is your BFM. Okay. Before we get into some concepts, I want to talk about some words that are good to know and that I'm going to use in the commentary and that you will find in literature and other videos about this topic, so it's good to know them. Now, as said already, BFM stands for Basic Fighter Maneuvers, and there's only this definition. Anything else people might say is wrong. It stands for Basic Fighter Maneuvers, and it covers 1 versus 1 scenarios only. Now, you don't necessarily have to be in the same plane, but it's 1 versus 1. You can solely focus on one opponent. And that's very important, the distinction here to make. Okay, a bandit in BFM terminology is usually your opponent, because when we talk about BFM techniques and concepts, we usually talk about them from your perspective. So you're the good guy and your opponent is the bandit. Okay? Then we have the aggressor. The aggressor is that pilot who is offensive. So that could be the bandit or it could be you. But in order to distinguish who is currently offensive and defensive, you can use the terms aggressor and defender. Of course, the defensive pilot is the defender. Yeah. And as I said, you might be either of them depending on your situation. Then we have a so-called BFM flow. This simply describes the sequence of maneuvering or your maneuvering flow. So as we saw, you might be in a maximum rate turn, but it doesn't work. You start reversing the turn, or you go vertical, or you dive away. And the way you connect these sort of moves or maneuvers, you can call BFM flow. And this is very important because when we talk about the concepts, I always want you to think about the BFM flow and visualize your BFM flow with regards to the concepts that you know. So we are not necessarily going to talk about specific maneuvers. In this situation you have to perform this maneuver, in this situation you have to perform this maneuver. We are more going into the direction of saying, okay, when you're in this situation, apply these concepts and you're going to survive. And then the maneuvers come naturally, because when you think in concepts, you understand and you naturally perform a move that complies with these concepts, right? And so you don't become predictable, because you're not just studying maneuvers, you're studying concepts and you're applying concepts. And it is a much more sustainable and successful technique than just saying, when I got a bandit on my 6 o'clock, I perform a barrel roll as a defensive maneuver. It's not getting you very far, let's say. Okay, so that's BFM flow. Then we have winning and losing cues. Of course, while you're maneuvering, and you probably saw this in the video, I might pull this up again to illustrate this real quick. There are certain cues that will tell you that you are winning or losing the fight, and you need to look out for these cues. Let's make an example here. Go into this situation where we are in a maximum rate turn. Okay, we are in this MiG-29 flying against this JF-17, and as you can see, this guy is moving further and further back along our canopy. So that tells us that we are currently losing the rate fight. So that's obviously a losing cue. When we identify this losing cue, we need to take action and change something. Now I identify that my speed is not proper, so I need to change the speed. But since this didn't happen fast enough to my liking, I actually reversed my turn, changed my BFM flow, and tried to generate an overshoot, which kind of happened. So I got back into an offensive position. I know what my problem initially was, is that my speed was too high. So what I have to do now is get to my best rate speed, and this is what I'm doing. And if I'm doing everything correctly, I should see winning cues, which means in this scenario that the bandit is going to move closer to my flight vector or gun sight, if you will. Okay? Closer to my nose. And depending on the situation you're in, these winning or losing cues might look different. But we'll talk about this in certain situations. But here again, your concepts are very important, and your understanding for the situation. And that's why we are going to talk about these concepts, and then you can apply these concepts to figure out what to look out for that tells you that you are currently winning or losing. Then we have the so-called deck transition. Again, as you can see in the video, we are very low on deck. There's literally zero opportunity to use the vertical downwards. And only if we have enough thrust available, we could climb away from the deck. But once we are at the deck, there's only limited options left. Usually what we want to do is fly a maximum rate turn at the deck. And deck transition describes the situation that we are coming down, the fight drags low for whatever reason, and we are ending up here down low. And then we need to usually change our game plan. And this is why we specifically give this a term. And you need to look out for this deck transition, because during the deck transition you want to get into a favorable position, for instance. Okay. An energy excursion is an investment of energy, like you probably saw here. Let's see. So we are getting to a good speed, and we see that we have some potential. So now we are pulling more and more on the stick. We are investing energy to get the guy into our gun sight, I think in the next turn or so. That's what we call an energy excursion. So it's a spending of energy. Now with energy excursions, you want to be careful. You don't want to spend your energy recklessly. Here we know we have some margin, so we can pull him into the crosshairs, because we also know we can pull enough lead to take a shot. Okay, but if we couldn't and we spent too much energy to achieve that gun solution, and we don't achieve it, we might have a problem. So be mindful. Overshoot. The overshoot, as we saw earlier, is when a guy that is behind you transitions to in front of you. And we will talk about this, the concept of the 9-3 line or 3-9 line, to visualize positional advantage and of course an overshoot. But usually an overshoot is when somebody goes in front of you. That would be a positional overshoot. Or, oops, if we go back to the video, what we see here, right around there, before we go up, is what we call a flight path overshoot. If you were to visualize where I'm going, where my flight path is, my turn path, and he's coming and cutting across the corner like this, you can see that he's overshooting my flight path. Another way to visualize this is because he's ending up very far on the other side of my canopy to the right, right? We are doing a left-hand turn and he's drifting very far out right. That indicates that he overshot my flight path, which made this reversal successful, for instance. So there's different kinds of overshoot, but we are usually talking about a flight path overshoot or a positional overshoot. Situational awareness, or SA, from here on I'm going to call it SA, it's just shorter, is simply your capability of observing and assessing a situation properly. Like, you can identify winning cues, you can identify that you're getting into trouble or that you're doing well, and so on and so forth. That's generally covered under the term situational awareness. And last but not least, we need to know what line of sight is. Now, line of sight is obviously me looking at the bandit. And what we often talk about in BFM is line of sight rate. That is simply the rate at which the bandit or your line of sight shifts. So in other words, the bandit shifts around on your canopy, for instance. Because this could give you clues as to how fast he is with respect to you, if he's going to overshoot or not, if he's currently winning a raid fight or not, for instance. That's why line of sight is important. Okay, next. Some simple geometric definitions. Because, after all, in BFM, we maneuver in 3D space. So we will have a geometric relationship between the bandit and yourself. And we need to visualize that geometric relationship in order to understand what we have to do to win the engagement. And that's why there's different kinds of angles that we can define. First of all, aspect. This is the simplest one, because you use either your tail or the bandit's tail as a reference line, and the angle offset from that where you're positioned is your aspect angle. So as you can see here, for instance, this angle is an aspect angle. Let's say this is 45 degrees. This here would be 90 degrees. If I'm up here, we have 180 degrees. Okay? Usually aspect does not take into account how you're oriented toward the bandit. So you could be looking this way, you could be looking at him, or you could be looking away from him. It would still be the same aspect. Yeah. Yeah. That's why 180 degrees aspect or high aspect is when someone is in front of you. Usually, let's say in a BVR situation, high aspect does take into account that the other guy is looking at you. But generally, in a BFM context, where the nose is pointing is not so much relevant, because what we want to understand is where the bandit is with respect to us. Is he in front of us or behind us or whatnot? So as I said, you can define aspect with respect to you or with respect to the bandit. It doesn't really matter. This is great for analyzing situations. More useful definitions are your angle definitions. Angle of tail or angle of nose. Now, angle in general, just the middle here, is basically the angle between his flight path and your flight path, or where his nose is pointing with respect to your nose is pointing. So for example, 2 examples here, we are in one situation down here, in the other situation down here, or up here. As you can see, we are connected by the same line, but in terms of angle, when we are here, we have a low angle. That means we are close to 6 o'clock, whereas here we have a large angle, which means that we are in front of him. Okay? So again, this is a way to define whether you are in front of him or behind him, and how far off your flight path is from his in terms of direction. What is most relevant for the pilot is angle of tail and angle of nose, because that's what you can easily visualize. Usually when a bandit is somewhere in front of you, in this quadrant, you talk about angle of nose. When your bandit is behind you, you talk about angle of tail. In other words, if you find someone here and you can easily define an angle of tail below 90 degrees, simply means the bandit is offensive on you. If your bandit is somewhere over here and you can easily define an angle of nose smaller than 90 degrees, your bandit is in front of you. Usually the way this works is that you would say angle of nose to the left or to the right, for example, 30 degrees left, 30 degrees right, and the same for the tail. Okay, so this would be 90 degrees angle of nose, and on the right side it would also be 90 degrees angle of nose, for instance, and you would simply say left or right to distinguish where they are. But this is what you usually use from inside the cockpit, because that's what you see. Sometimes these are used synonymously, and that might happen to me as well. But generally speaking, when we talk about assessing the situation from the cockpit's perspective, this is what we use. But you can just as well use it from let's say a bird's view on the situation. So I'm trying to use this because it's most visualized. Okay. Questions so far on these definitions? Because if not, we are going to dive a bit deeper into the concepts. Now, the very first thing that we need to understand is because we have a goal, right? We want to survive and we want to eliminate the threat. So we need to understand what assets do we have to achieve that goal. Or in other words, what advantages do we need to secure to achieve that goal? Usually you would hear the term advantage, but I find assets a good description, because like money or other financial assets that could buy you nice stuff, having these assets in a dogfight can buy you victory, right? So I think assets is a good description here. And the beautiful thing about BFM is there's only really two assets or advantages that you need to care about. First and foremost, energy. Energy is obviously in terms of dogfighting BFM the currency of your maneuvering, or the currency in general. So just like money can buy you nice things, energy can buy you nice things in terms of maneuvers that you can use to defeat your opponent. If you don't have energy, you don't have options. If you don't have money, you don't have options. Simple equivalent here. The types of energy that we have are potential energy, altitude. I gave the quantity that we measure that energy in. So potential energy measured in altitude, kinetic energy measured in speed, because these two quantities you can actually read from inside your cockpit. And you can easily judge whether an opponent is faster or slower than you, or higher or lower than you. So you get a good idea what your respective energy states are, what your own energy state is, what the opponent's energy state is, and hence whether you are in an energy deficit or advantage. Of course, you want to achieve the latter. And hence, simple rule, the more energy you have, the more opportunities you have, the more initiative you can take, and hence you dictate the fight, usually. And again, the energy that you have in form of potential and kinetic energy, your total energy state, can be converted into maneuvers or traded into maneuvers. So you spend your energy to perform certain maneuvers, and that can be used to defeat your opponent. And hence, like you would take care of your money and not just spend it recklessly, so eventually you can buy the things that you want. So you preserve it where you can, you save, and so on and so forth. You want to save your energy for the moments when it's needed and when it counts, okay? So generally speaking, conserving your energy is always a good idea. There are some limitations to that when we talk about jet dogfight having guided ammunitions there. But especially for warbird flying, this is very, very much important. And when we talk about guns-only fights in jets, that's also important. Now, the second advantage that we can have is position, of course. Because he who is behind the opponent, and let's say we are just using guns that are firing forward, can deploy his guns, whereas the other one who is in front cannot. Okay? So the motto would be behind to win the fight. Okay? Now, how do we know that we are behind the opponent and he's not behind us? Well, we can use the definition of the 3-9 line, or 9-3 line, whatever you want to call it, to evaluate whether we are offensive or the opponent is. Generally speaking, if someone is in front of your 9-3 line, or you are behind his 9-3 line, then you're offensive on him. If someone is behind your 9-3 line, down here, or you are in front of his 9-3 line, he's offensive on you. In other words, you're defensive. Okay, so it's a very good and easy to visualize concept, and it's great to tell you immediately whether you are in an offensive position or not. Okay. So, the thing is, when we are talking about using guided ammunitions, position becomes more relevant than energy. Because when you have guided ammunitions, you don't need to get your nose fully around to get a good shot on the opponent, especially when we talk about higher foresight missiles like the 9X or the R-73. If we were to look here in this example, if I had an R-73, I do, but I'm not using it, I could easily shoot the missile from here. So positional advantage is very important, because just like he could fire his missiles when he was offensive on me, which is right about here. So he's drifting further and further back on my canopy, and he could easily fire the missiles now because he's in a positional advantage slightly. Okay, whereas when we are in a positional advantage now here as well, we could easily fire a missile. So position with guided ammunitions, especially modern ones, becomes the most important asset that you can look for. But since in the basic course we are just talking about guns only dogfights, we consider both. Depending on the situation, one or the other might be preferable, but generally speaking, it's energy. Okay, if in doubt, energy is usually your better friend. Okay, right. Questions on that? Okay, moving on. Now, what is BFM in a bit more detail? Now, BFM, as already elaborated, is a tool that you use to achieve or gain these assets. In other words, to get into a position that you can shoot down the enemy without allowing him to shoot you down. So typical head-on situation where you might be above him, but he's still coming head-on to you. It's a neutral position because you can both deploy weapons. So that's very important. You're only really offensive on the other guy when you can deploy you, or if you can deploy your weapons and he cannot. Okay, so this is important. That's also the goal in BFM. You want to become truly offensive, unless you don't have other options, but that's generally the goal. So, how can we achieve that? Well, we are moving in 3D space, so we can use geometry to position ourselves well. A good example of how to use geometry is this reversal here that we do. Now you see from this more or less steady horizontal turn, where I missed the part, we slowly transition, or we transition into a different geometry. Okay, so here we are going purely horizontally, and we see that it's not quite working for us. So we change the geometry, we go up, we change our relative position and our flight path with respect to the opponent. He cannot comprehend what's happening. He maintains his geometry, he just keeps going in this rate turn, but us changing the geometry helped us to get back into a better offensive position. Okay, so that's a good example of how you can use geometry. What we did also employ is a little bit of physics, and under physics, as you can see here, I also count the technical aspects of your aircraft, so it's aircraft performance. Okay, so generally these two tools in these two categories you can use to turn the situation in your favor. Now, as I said, in terms of physics or physical factors, you can use gravity, because in this case we use gravity while pulling up. We slowed down, and this allowed the opponent to overshoot. We used our aircraft performance to climb out of this turn and then re-enter it. We used gravity again to get to a good rate speed, and overall, of course, we adjusted our energy state. We converted our kinetic energy into potential energy and vice versa when we came back down. So we used all of these at once except atmosphere. Atmosphere, of course, you can hide in clouds, right? So it's a valid tactic to escape from an opponent or, reset if need be. So these are these kinds of things. And for geometry, as I said, you can change your flight path, you can do lots of other things, but generally speaking, it comes down to this: that you manage range, angle, and closure. Now, as you can see, range is simply the distance to the target. You want to be at a comfortable distance so you can shoot the target. Right now, we are too far away. You don't get a gun solution. And also the angle is too high that we can actually shoot. Now, as we've already discussed, the angle is our nose or flight path with respect to the opponents. If the angle is too high, we cannot deploy our weapons. Now here we reduce our angle, as you can see, and we also reduce the distance, so it's getting easier for us to shoot the target. And we also manage closure rates. As you can see, closure rate simply means, are we getting close to the bandit or is he getting away from us? If the closure rate is 0, obviously we maintain our relative position. So in other words, there's no relative motion between him and us in terms of forward speed. Okay? And as you can see, as we are getting hits and he's constant, we are keeping him at a constant and comfortable distance, where if he was to make a sudden move, we can still react. But as we keep missing some of the shots, we are getting closer now. Angle is still okay, but range is decreasing, and and our closure rate is increasing a little bit as well. And that leads to the following situation, that we almost overshoot. We also get into his wake turbulence, which causes trouble. So you see, our system already tells us, don't shoot, we are too close. And now if he was a bit clever and started to reverse on us here, I think he lost orientation a bit, he could have easily reversed that situation. So you want to manage range, angle, and closure and keep them in proper dimensions, or yeah. So you can maintain control. Okay, so you want to maintain control over the bandit, and that requires you to stay inside of his control zone. Now his control zone, let's see if we have a picture here actually or not. If not, then I visualize it. No, we don't. Then I visualize it with this video. The control zone is an area. Let's use this here. Let's say roughly half your HUD, and then maybe until, so this is how you visualize it in the cockpit, until, yeah, maybe just here on the canopy bow. You can clearly see he's here, that we are still offensive on him, and we keep him inside of this window and to stay constantly offensive on him, okay? And this is how you can visualize the control zone. It's basically a cone-shaped area at a good range behind the bandit, where you could, in a short moment, deploy your weapons. As you can see, we still need to get a bit closer to deploy our weapons, but that's basically what it means. We are in a position that we can, with a little bit of effort, or even no effort at all, just by pulling him into the gun sight, deploy our weapons. This is what the control zone is. Now what we need to understand is that the control zone is obviously moving, because it's attached to our target. So we need to move with that control zone to stay inside of it. And a good way is to really visualize that control zone. Now imagine here we have a guy, and there's like a, as I said, a cone-shaped three-dimensional body behind the tail. Not at the tail, but you know, at a good distance, so we can still react, because we said we need to keep a good distance, or a large enough distance so we can react to whatever he's doing. So let's say right about here until, or in this area, is our control zone. Now as he moves about, we want to stay inside of this area, and at best in the upper portion of that control zone, because that allows us to have a little bit of energy advantage, okay? And we need to visualize that volume, or that, you know, area in space, and then we want to maneuver our jet such, or aircraft, whatever aircraft we're flying, that we stay inside of that volume, okay, inside the control zone. And that I found really helpful. When you start learning to visualize that control zone, it almost comes naturally what you have to do with your stick and throttle to stay inside of that control zone, okay? And to stay inside of that control zone, you usually have to manage range, angle, and closure. more or less, because they manage your position. So this is geometry, if you will. Other ways of, or other examples of how geometry can be used or manipulated to achieve a goal. Let's consider this example. The bandit is on this turn circle, and we are on this turn circle. Now we assume the bandit is going counterclockwise around a circle, and so are we. So initially he might be here, and we might be here, so about 180 degrees offset, and we move about, and he's also moving about. Now, as you can see, and you could see this in the video as well, this will result in a situation that we are kind of approaching the bandit, because there is a point where we are closer to one another compared to a larger distance. So for example, if we are here and he's here, that's still 180 degrees. We are further away from each other. If we move 90 degrees further along the turn circle, we are here, we are a bit closer to one another, for instance, okay? And that would you can visual, or in the actual fight, you see this as a so-called yo-yoing effect. So the bandit comes closer and distances himself from you, comes closer and distances himself from you. In this situation, it's really difficult to shoot the bandit, because even if you were in his rear quarter, your flight path is always misaligned, and it's hard for you to get him into the crosshair. So what you have to do is you want to align your turn circle with his, so that you can shoot him more easily. Okay? And so you could fly a so-called turn circle extension. Let's say he is here, and we are here, and we see and we know that we are kind of inside of his turn circle in this scenario. What we can do is we can at this point simply fly straight for a second or two and bring that blue circle onto the red one. Okay, and that's a so-called turn circle extension. And then we continue the turn with the bandit. And then we have geometrically adjusted our flight path such that we can shoot him down. So this is another example of how you can use geometry to solve a problem. Right. So this just very fundamental or top-level concepts here, but they will reappear throughout the entire course. Now, when we talk about BFM flow, I've already mentioned that this is the sort of maneuvering flow that you apply during your fighting, and I already told you I want you to think in concepts, not in dedicated maneuvers. So what you can see here is that we have a list of priorities that we need to maintain, or how we let's say describe our BFM flow. So first of all, another visualization is this BFM funnel here. So imagine this is a 3D object, and there is gravity that's pulling down. Gravity in this sense is being reckless and negligent and not paying attention to what's happening. You very easily end up in the red zone. You don't want to be in the red zone. You want to be in the green zone, because when you're in the green zone, you're offensive. So you are in a much better position to defeat the opponent. The yellow zone and orange zone is sort of a neutral zone. That means, okay, he doesn't have an advantage, you don't really have an advantage, but at least it's better than being defensive, because, well, you might not be able to shoot him, but he cannot shoot you. Example, you fly a maximum rate turn, your opponent does as well. You're about 180 degrees offset in your turn, so he is here, you are here. You both fly the same rate, turn rate. This situation is going to continue forever, but at least nobody can shoot you, and he can, and that's better than being shot at, obviously. And then we could be in the red zone, which is being defensive, and that's obviously not where you want to be, because to get out of here you will have to push against this gravity of recklessness, and to get up here. So it really requires effort to get up here, and it also requires effort to stay up here. It's just easier when you already start up here. That's what this is supposed to illustrate. And if you go back to the left side, you can write down priorities. So being offensive means that if you can, and that should be your first and foremost goal, begin the fight from an advantageous position, well, you should do so, right? Obtain or gain the advantage. Once you have the advantage, maintain it. You need to maintain your advantage to stay offensive, obviously, and that requires work. If, and now we get into the neutral situation, if you can't maintain your advantage and you lose it, which might indicate that the other guy is better than you in a real fight scenario, not necessarily training, well, you might want to explore your options to escape before you lose all advantage and escaping is not possible anymore. So even with jets and guided ammunitions, missiles that can fly a certain distance, you can still fly away because missiles effective range will decrease a lot when you fly away from your opponent and he's chasing you, because you don't have a high closure rate in this situation. Okay, so he might not be able to use his missiles at all if you escape early enough. For warbirds, that's obviously much more relevant. All you have to do to escape successfully is to get outside of the opponent's gun range, which is, let's say, round about 500 meters. If you're beyond 500 meters, you're safe for now. And this means even if you are in a slower aircraft, for example, if you escape while you still have a slight advantage, for example, in terms of altitude, and you can dive away and pick up speed, that's the moment to go. Okay? Because when he's at the same altitude as you and maybe already close, and he's the faster aircraft, well, it's going to difficult. It's going to be difficult. And in this case, if you cannot escape, at least keep the fight neutral. Okay, but this is already kind of difficult. So we are kind of at the lower end here of this area here in this cone. Yeah. Well, if that doesn't work, your next priority is obviously you deny the opponent to shoot at you. In terms of a guns-only fight, it means stay away from his gun sight, stay away from his nose. If he can't point his nose at you, he can usually not shoot at you. Okay, so that's something that you can do. If he can use missiles, you want to stay outside the missiles envelope. That might require that you get so close to him that he cannot deploy his missiles, because we call it you min-range it, because a missile needs a certain range to become active. And if you're so close to him, if you're, so to speak, hugging your opponent, he cannot shoot the missile. Okay? But if he manages to get a weapon fired, whether that be a missile or actual guns, then you obviously need to defeat the weapon. And the bandit becomes a second priority, because you can fly a beautiful BFM. If the weapon still kills you, well, it's game over. So that is the priority list you want to go through. And priority in a top level sense. So you want to start out here. But if for whatever reason you already start out here, for example, because you have to do a low level strike and you are jumped by an enemy opponent, then obviously your priority list goes this way. If he hasn't deployed weapons yet and you are defensive, well, try and stay here. If he does deploy the weapons, defeat the weapon. You understand how this goes. You always want to be at the highest step possible whenever you're fighting a dogfight. And if you can, move this way. But if you can't move this way and you go this way, then this is what you need to look out for. Is this kind of clear what this is supposed to illustrate? Okay, perfect. Then, to become a bit more technical here, some concepts that are used in BFM. First of all, you can distinguish certain fighting styles. This is more relevant in World War II fighting, because the airplanes are, let's say, more different to one another than I'd say it is the case in modern jets. And yeah, I think in this context is where these definitions originated from. So you have, first and foremost, your turn and burn. That simply means you turn very hard, you exploit your aircraft's turn performance, superior turn performance, to win a fight. Perfect example, Spitfire. Spitfire is the best turning aircraft in a World War II scenario. You want to use that to outturn your opponent. Okay? If your aircraft is not a very good turner or the best turner, or your turning abilities are not just that good yet, but you have an aircraft that climbs well, that dives well, and is fast, well, then you can do energy fighting. And that simply means that you conserve your energy, you try and engage with an altitude advantage, you try and get an energy advantage over your opponent, and then use that energy advantage to defeat him. And again, another example, you are in a 109 and you want to or have to fight a Spitfire. What you want to do is you want to stay fast, you want to use your superior climb performance to build an energy advantage, and then you can actually loop around him and kill him when he's stalling out below you, trying to climb up to you to get his guns to bear, right? So this is what energy fighting would mean. And this is generally a very good approach, if you can. Stall fighting is a sort of, let's say, a specific category that I defined for myself, and it simply means that you really push your aircraft to its limits, hoping that you can, fly your aircraft at its stall limit better than the opponent, and then you can win the fight that way. But that obviously requires a lot of experience. For instance, stall fighting blends in a little bit into energy fighting. So for instance, take a 109, you perform a high speed climb, you gain some distance against the Spitfire, and as the distance grows and grows, you start going into a steeper climb. He might think, I can catch him. He's also pulling his nose up, and you just climb, and he stalls out somewhere down here below you, right? So you are up here in your 109. The Spitfire is up here, and before he can down here, and before he can really get his guns on, he's plummeting back down, and you just come around and shoot him. Okay, so the stall fighting can, blend into energy fighting. But another example would be you just get so slow that a lesser experienced pilot would simply lose control over his aircraft. For example, in very strong or intense flat scissors or something like that, right? You could really push your aircraft to the limit, and the other guy might lose control, and that gives you an opportunity to kill him. So that would be stall fighting. But again, you gotta know what you're doing, because that can very quickly turn south. Another very funny but important concept is the tactical egg. I have a slide on this, so I will elaborate on this a little further down. But this simply describes the influence of gravity on your maneuvers, especially when you fly in the vertical domain. Then obviously we already talked about geometry. Visualizing your position with respect to the bandit's position is very necessary to understand what you have to do to get into a good position. Then we have lift vector control. Lift vector control is a way of telling your aircraft, this is where I want you to be. So placing your lift vector, as we've already learned, because our lift vector dictates where our aircraft is turning toward and how quickly and efficiently our aircraft is turning, right? Maximum rate turn and so on and so forth. Placing our lift vector around in 3D space, you can imagine here, we could point the lift vector further into the turn, we could reduce our bank angle and point the lift vector further up a little bit. That pretty much dictates how you maneuver your jet around, what kind of trajectory and flight path you're going to have, and hence it's very important that you manage your lift vector. We'll talk about this in more detail during the examples. Turning room. Turning room is basically the space that's available to you for maneuvering. Again, we'll have slides to visualize this, so I won't dwell on it now. And then pursuit types. This is basically how you position your nose. And how the bandit is positioning your nose with respect to you. So it tells you what he's doing if he's offensive. Okay? So these are just some keywords, buzzwords, and we are going to look at what they are in a bit. Now, fighting styles. We've already talked about the types, some types that exist. Now, how do you choose a proper fighting style that fits you? Well, you got to be aware of what your current skill is. If you're not that familiar with your aircraft yet, you might just not want to dive into stall fighting too much, but you might want to consider an energy fighting approach, because that's a bit easier and a safer approach. So depending on your current skill level, you need to choose accordingly. Then you should fly to your aircraft's strengths. So if you fly an aircraft that turns very, very well, better than everybody else, you should use that. If you fly an aircraft that climbs better and is faster than everybody else, well, you should use that. And lastly, exploit your opponent's weaknesses. Now, I usually prioritize it in this order. Sometimes people say first exploit your opponent's weaknesses, then fly to your strengths. Usually, when you exploit your opponent's weaknesses, you fly to your strengths, because that's what different aircraft are usually about. But realistically speaking, you don't always know exactly what the opponent's aircraft's weaknesses are. But you know usually much better what the strengths of your airframes are. Okay? So this is much easier for you to evaluate. So if you fly to your strengths, usually that means you exploit your opponent's weaknesses, because relative to you, for example, you have a superior climb performance, then relative to you, your opponent's aircraft is weaker in that domain. So you exploit his weakness. Well, if you fight an opponent an airframe that is better in every category, in every way possible with respect to your airframe, then that is a moot point anyway, right? So you can't exploit any weaknesses, because the airframe doesn't have weaknesses compared to yours. But you can exploit your opponent's skill weaknesses, so to speak, okay? But of course that fight is going to be much harder. But this is also the reason why I usually prioritize it this way. First, understand what your aircraft is good at, and then learn what your opponent's airframes are not good at. Okay? Right. So, then a bit more describe what these different kinds of fighting or styles are. I'm not going to dwell on it. Some examples here. You can read through this in a quiet minute. If you got questions, you can ask them later on, anytime in Discord. But what I want to point out is what we've already touched on, is rate fight and positioning or nose positioning fight. So a rate fight obviously means that you maximize some sort of rate. Could be a climb rate, could be a turn rate. So if you fly in the vertical, that would be your climb rate, and if you fly a looping, you have a climb rate and a turn rate, so you would kind of maximize both. Generally speaking, if we talk about rate fighting, we mean turn rate. Okay, so we already know if we are in a situation where we need to rate fight, we want to maximize our turn rate, we want to fly our maximum rate turn. Position fighting, well, that simply means, like in a one-circle flow, this is a typical example. A two-circle flow would be an example for rate fight. In a one-circle flow where we need to get our nose around before the opponent, again, flat scissors for example, if this is our opponent, we want to make sure we fly this sort of turn to get a shot here, to get a shot here, and so on and so forth, right? We want to position our nose. We care about our nose positioning. And that's why we call this a nose positioning fight or a position fight. Yeah, or a min radius fight. Okay, so this is that. And these are the two basic fighting concepts or situations or scenarios that you find yourself in. You either have a two-circle flow in some way where turn rate or rate is important, or you have that. Okay, so these two can go into any of these. These are more fundamental concepts. This is also why we talked about aircraft performance in the first place. Right. The tactical egg is a very simple concept, but it's something you need to be aware of. In air combat maneuvering or BFM, right? We don't want to fly nice looking loopings, right? We want to get tight turns at a high turn rate. So for instance, take this vertical maneuver. If we really want to maximize or minimize our radius here, gravity is going to assist us as we go over the top because it's pulling us down, so it's pulling us closer to the turn center. Additionally to the lift vector that's also pointing this way. As we are coming down here, our lift vector is pointing that way, and gravity is pulling us outside, away from the turn center. So hence, at the bottom, we will fly a wider turn radius. And that is very important to understand that when you go over the top, that's what some people call this, or when you go up, your turn radius is going to decrease. Whereas when you go down, it's going to increase. In other words, if you're following an opponent on this black line, for example, and you are up here, and while you're trying to get your nose around to follow that black line, he's already here. So in other words, he has completed your turn earlier than you have. Although you have assist from gravity, then he's doing something better. And that's a cue for you that something's not going right. Okay, so that would be a losing cue in this situation. Yeah, and this effect you can obviously feel every time you add a vertical component to your maneuvering. So also the gray line, which is partially vertical only, you can feel that effect. But this is why, or it's described as tactical egg. I would have rather called it potatoes because eggs are usually sharp on both ends, but yeah, it's just what they call it. So you've heard it. Right. In terms of geometry, what we can say is that we can obviously define geometric planes, like literally, if we talk about a 3D space, that here, for instance, is a geometric plane, but also that will be a geometric plane, a different one. There might be some intersection here between these two planes, but generally speaking, what we want to achieve is that we fly in the same plane as our opponent, or let's say he's flying somewhere here in this plane. If we are flying also in this plane, that's what we would call an in-plane maneuver. But if we were to fly, let's say, up here, and we occasionally dive down to try and get a shot and get out again, then this maneuver of going up would be called an out-of-plane maneuver. Or in other words, let's say we are here on this plane and we are turning around and the opponent notices that we are getting on his 6. He's just starting to split S and dive down as we try and shoot him, for instance. That would also be an out-of-plane. That would be an out-of-plane maneuver. Out-of-plane maneuvers are usually used for defensive purposes, but they can also be used, as you can see here, in offensive purposes. And the way to visualize the plane of motion that we are in, we can visualize our lift vector, because that's where we are pulled toward, let's say in a turn. And we can visualize our velocity vector, or to keep forces here, our thrust vector. Now, whether we have a net thrust or not depends on how much drag we have. Whether we have a net lift force or not depends on how much weight there is. But generally speaking, if we visualize these two vectors, and this just in terms of direction, not necessarily in terms of their magnitude, then we can visualize where we are maneuvering. Or you simply use a geometric, as you can see, definition here, because here the thrust vector would be in plane, but our lift vector would maybe point slightly outwards, because we cannot fly a 90-degree turn. But this is generally how you can visualize that. Now, we were already talking about lift vector control. Imagine here we are in this horizontal turn, 180 degrees offset to one another, and we are flying this exact same rate turn. This relative angle of 180 degrees will persist the entire time. That won't change. That will always be like this. Now, what could we do to maybe gain an advantage or change the situation? Well, we could point our lift vector in front of our opponent, maybe slightly dive and undershoot the opponent's flight path, cut into the corner to maybe close in, right? So we can effectively point our lift vector in a certain direction to change our trajectory. Another way of changing our lift vector here would be, this is our horizontal lift vector component that's shown here. But imagine we are talking about a turn where we are banked and we are considering our our total lift vector. Now, let's say if we had the aircraft performance, like some excess thrust left, what we could do is we could simply bank a little harder, tilt the lift vector, total lift vector a bit further into the turn, increase the magnitude of our horizontal lift vector component, get more centripetal force and hence fly a tighter turn, or if we want to maintain a flight path, increase our turn rate. So in both ways you can manipulate your lift vector, but generally speaking, this is what we mean by lift vector control or lift vector placement. Okay, so there's different options we have depending on the scenario. In this case, of course, we want to be careful, because if we cut into the corner like this and we can't really make that turn and we shoot out like this, then we have a flight path overshoot here. The opponent can use that to reverse on us. So you want to be careful when you do such things. And in order to evaluate if a maneuver like this would be successful or not, we use the concept of turning room. The concept of turning room is very simple. There is a certain volume or area in this 2D example, but turning room is really horizontal turning room and vertical turning room. Both exist. Is really that room that's available to you for your maneuver. Take this example. A good way to illustrate the turning room is to simply connect your 9-3 lines. Then you can see, because you want to stay behind your opponent's 9-3 line, right? So you define this sort of area. And this is the area that you have available for turning. And any maneuver that fits into this area would still allow you to stay behind that opponent. You could fly a maneuver like this. You could fly the turn as it's indicated. But if you were so fast that you couldn't fly on this turn, and your turn would somewhat go out here, then you don't have the turning room that's available is not enough for you to make your maneuver. Okay? So visualizing turning room is very important. Here are some other examples. This is similar to the one that we've seen before. And I've deliberately given you aspect and angle measurements, just roughly. Okay, it's not 100% accurate, but that's not important. What you can see here is what turning room is also dependent on. Now we could say, since our 9-3 lines are 90 degrees to one another, we literally have 0 aspect and 0 angle. We have infinite turning room. And while that might be true to the sides, it's not so much true to the front. Because you can imagine, if this guy makes a sudden move, then this piece of our turning room volume is not very large. And if he makes a sudden move like this, we might not be able to squeeze our follow-up maneuver into that sliver. And we might, go out of that. So your turning room is also dependent on your distance to the target, which is why we want to keep our distance at a moderate range to keep, when we are offensive, to keep that turning room high. Okay, here is a similar example, but when we merge, we literally have 0 turning room, because as he goes like this, and and we go like this, and we basically chase each other's 9-3 line, no maneuver at this position we can fly guarantees or allows us to stay behind our opponent's 9-3 line, because he's at the same time chasing ours, right? So if we match our turn rates, this is basically what we would do. We would always be 180 degrees offset to one another. Whereas if you can see here, some moments before that merge, when we are still in front of him, we could anticipate that we are merging, and we could start maneuvering early. So we could use that room to fly, some aspect of our turn or some part of our turn already before we merge. And as he flies or reaches this point, and now starts turning, you can imagine we've already turned to this position. So we are in a much better position. See, we are almost offensive on him. So that's what we would call a lead turn. But this illustrates why turning room is also defined or dependent on the lateral distance that you have. And as a general rule, when you fly offensively, you want to keep your turning room as high as possible. And when you fly defensively, you want to minimize the turning room available for your opponent to maneuver, because that makes it more difficult for him to manage range, angle, and closure. That might give you an opportunity to overshoot or cause him to overshoot. And on the other hand, with limited turning room, he might not be able to fly any sort of maneuver that gives him a gun solution. And the same applies in the vertical, obviously. So for instance, we can draw the same example of this merge here. We are up here. You see, this is our vertical turning room. And if he's flying like this, and we are starting to turn early as he's coming around, once he notices that we are actually merged and he starts turning now, we are already here when he initiates his move. So we've already positioned ourselves into an offensive position. And same here, if we were up here behind him, we also have that vertical turning room available to maneuver. So he might fly a tight turn, or he's trying to climb toward us. We can use that vertical turning room. Okay. So this is turning room, and when we fly, you will see that, we will visualize all of this, and it's going to be easier to understand. And the last thing that I want to go through is the pursuit types, because all of this we need for our exercise. Pursuit types is very simple. If one opponent is one guy is offensive on the other, there's 3 ways he can position his nose. He could point his nose in front of us, he could point his nose right at us, or he could point his nose behind us. Now, what do you think? Now, the effects of the different pursuit types are listed here. So when you go lead pursuit, you usually do this to get closer, because you cut the corner, so to speak, right? Pure pursuit, you try and manage your closure range, your closure rate and your range a bit better, or just to maintain the position as it is, you could say. And in lag pursuit, you usually want to decrease aspect, because you can see, okay, there's still some aspect here. That would be a difficult shot. That would be a difficult shot. But if we maneuver here and then we shoot at him, if he doesn't react, for instance, right, then that would be a much easier shot. So lagged pursuit is usually used to decrease aspect, to maintain or increase your energy, and to increase the distance a little bit. So if you get a bit too close, or in a raid fight, when we are in lag pursuit and he's in the assessment window, with the lag pursuit we could also maintain the distance. Depends a little bit on the situation whether we maintain the distance or not. Now what do you think? You are here and you are looking up at an opponent that's diving at you, and you see that he's pointing his nose behind you, he's in lag pursuit. Are you in immediate danger? Or what does it tell you about his intentions?
That he builds up.
Yeah.
So he's behind you and you can't see where it is. He's lower than you.
Yeah, let's see he's higher, so you can see him. This example, we can see him. So if he points behind us, right, we can conclude that he's trying to get into a better position. If that was a turn, horizontal maximum rate turn, and he's in lag pursuit, that tells us that he's currently at his maximum rate performance, usually. Because if he could pull the nose around, especially if he was in range to deploy his guns to shoot. But if he can't, if his nose stays behind us all the time, that means he can't shoot at us. And especially in this example of a maximum rate turn where he cannot get his nose further front, because he's already maxed out his rate turn, for instance, that's what you would call he's stuck in lag. And that simply tells you, okay, at the moment he can't shoot me, that's fine. If he points at you in this situation, do we have to fear to get hit? Let's say this is still some 300 to 400 meters away.
Yes, you can hit you in the tail, actually.
Yeah. Let's say we are, of course this is not to scale. If that was 300 meters, he would be much smaller. But generally speaking, if they point their guns or their nose right at us, by the time his bullets reach us, we are already out of danger. So pure pursuit is also not too dangerous. But if he pulls lead here, and he points his nose in front of us, that's when we have to be careful. Also in a turn. What you see in a turn, and you saw this in the video, when I start pulling the bandit into the gun sight, I am in lag pursuit. I pull him into pure pursuit, which is when his aircraft is here, and finally pull lead when I put him into the crosshairs. Okay, so when you see the nose transitioning from lag to pure to lead, that tells you he's preparing for a shot. And that tells you, now I need to defend. Jinx, a guns jinx, maybe reverse my turn, or split S and dive away. You need to do something to avoid that gunshot, or turn a bit tighter if you can, so his lead is not sufficient enough to shoot you. But this is why nose positioning is very important, and you need to be aware of this. When you are in this position, you can obviously control how you approach the bandit, but you also give away your intentions. If you start pulling lead and he pays attention, he knows that you're trying to shoot him, and he will take defensive actions. Now, knowing this, you can prepare yourself. He might start defensive maneuvers as soon as I pull lead. Or in other words, if you're experienced enough, you would minimize the time from lag to lead to get the gun solution. If you do this very quickly, before he knows, you've already shot, and it's too late, right? So the more experienced you get, also with estimating your lead. Now in our jets, it's less complicated because we have computed gun sights. So you want to pull lead only in the last moment to not give away that you are trying to shoot him, because then he has less reaction time to shoot at you. And that's why pursuit types are so important, both for the defender but also as the aggressor. And you need to be aware that he can read those when you are here. Okay? Very important. And last but not least, BFM is or are flown in the future, depending on basic fighter maneuvers, if you say that, and lose sight, lose fight. If you lose sight on your opponent, you can't move with respect to your bandit, and that's what BFM is all about. You maneuver in relation to your bandit. You can't do that if you don't see him. Okay? What we do in this scenario, if we lose sight, we always assume that he can still see us and that he's maneuvering to our 6 o'clock. So we will immediately look behind us and keep scanning behind us until he appears in our control zone. That's the best we can do. Or when we look to the other directions, but generally we look behind than we look to the front. We can spot him. We obviously resume maneuvering in relation to him immediately. But if we lose sight for a few seconds, that's what we do. We look behind. Is he there? Not yet. We look behind. We look behind, to the front behind, maybe to the side behind, and at some point he will appear, given that he did not lose sight himself. But that's the best thing you can do. And BFM are flown in the future simply means if you can predict where your bandit is going to be in the next moment, you can maneuver your jet such that your guns are pointing at the right point in space, aim point, so you can shoot the bandit when he's at this position, right? Or in other words, you want to maneuver your jet such that in the next moment you are in a position to engage. So that's why predicting what he's doing, looking ahead, or thinking ahead is very important. If you're one step ahead, first of all, very little things can surprise you and you are much more prepared for what's going to come, right? So that's what's meant by this term. You need to think ahead to beat your opponent, because it's seconds and split seconds what we do here in BFM. Okay? Now, I know this is a lot to digest, but for now we stop here. The rest we are going to look at in the next session. These are some very basic principles, and we are going to apply them now in our practice examples. We are going to fly more or less a sort of pursuits that we've done, like we've done already in the past session, and we are going to apply these concepts, or I'm going to comment on these concepts. So what I'm going to try is obviously get or maintain an offensive position on the assistant, which is going to be one of you, and then I'm going to use these concepts to show you or comment for you why I'm behaving the way I'm behaving. So you get a feeling of how to apply these concepts, how to visualize these concepts, and how you can use them to very quickly assess the situation and take action or corrective actions and whatnot. So you can join the OFS server 3. I've already set up the mission, and then we take some aircraft, and whoever is going to practice with me first, he's going to be in front of me initially, and then we're also going to do some defensive action. So I'm going to switch roles, and I'm going to use these concepts in my commentary to show you, how it works. Sounds good?
Yep.
Perfect. Then you can join the server. We've got a bandit off our nose. He obviously knows that we are here. We are still at a good distance away, too far to engage with our weapons. So the first premise would be that we decrease our range so we can get a gun solution on him. So as you can see here, I'm pulling inside of his turn to decrease range, and I'm maintaining a good speed as we learned for this. Now, as we're getting closer, as you can see, he's now trying to use the vertical, and he got slow, we got fast, which is why we are drifting slightly outside, but we visualize the control zone somewhere behind his jet, and we try and maneuver toward it. He probably lost sight on us a little bit, because he could have used that opportunity as a reversal. We were a bit fast here and couldn't fly a good tight turn as he was going down. This time we do it better. We put our throttle back, maybe even deploy our speed brakes, and we're just visualizing that control zone. You see that area behind him at this range, about 3,000 feet. That's perfect. We could get, see, a good gun solution if you wanted to shoot now. We get the shoot cue. We could simply kill him, and that's what we visualize. If he's starting to maneuver, just do what you did. Go vertical, dive down. We just visualize the control zone and stay behind him. And as you can see, as he's maneuvering toward us, whether that be by diving down or pulling up toward us or flying a tighter turn, he's decreasing that turning room. And you see how quickly that turning room can decrease when he's maneuvering toward us. You saw that how close we got to him, right? So I deployed air brakes again to manage my closure rate and to manage my range. Again, 1,500 feet, that's still good. Much closer than that I wouldn't go in the jet. It's not necessary. Your weapons are very capable at this range, and see, we can maintain a good guns track here. And we don't want to get too much closer because then it would get hazy, especially if he's starting to get low. And you saw him earlier using the clouds as cover. Good thing for us is that we have radar lock in these jets, so we can see him through the clouds, if you will. We use every opportunity possible to maintain visual. Now, let's see what we can do if our turning room gets too small. See, now we are very close to him, and if he starts turning into us, roll right and pull hard. It's very difficult to follow him or to not overshoot. You see, we kind of overshot his flight path here, but because he's still fast, he couldn't reverse on us. That's why you don't want to be too close. Okay, you want to be at a good distance so you can still react. See, when we are here and he's doing his vertical maneuvers, we still have a good distance, and we are much better in control. You see where I'm keeping him? I'm keeping him between the upper edge of my HUD and my canopy bow, or slightly above that canopy bow. This is my assessment window. Any bandit that I keep in there, I'm offensive on, and I can, you know, if I need to, knock, pull, lead, and get a gunshot here. Okay, so you wanna keep your bandits there if you're not just ready to engage and take a shot at them. Okay, so this is that, and as you can see, he's maneuvering with respect to me. He's trying to make it difficult for me to follow, and so on and so forth. But we are simply managing range, angle, and closure, and that does the trick. Now we don't see him in the clouds, but we have our radar lock, which is great, so we can still maneuver with respect to him. Every time he's doing his vertical maneuvers, we are just trying to maintain the separation, and with our range, as you can see, 1,000 feet, now we are getting a bit close. Wake turbulence is starting to hit us. That's certainly something that we want to avoid, to get too close. So 1,500 to 3,000 feet is a very great range, maybe even up to 4,500, where you can still deploy your weapons in the jet. And the same distance is roughly applied to warbirds, maybe a bit closer, because of course you're less fast, so you cover less distance in the same amount of time. So you might be anything within 300 meters is good. Anything, you know, between, let's say, 100 and 300 meters is a good range. 100 is already very close. As he gets slow, as you can see, we are just getting slow with him. We are prioritizing position right now over energy to just stay behind, because we don't want to give him an opportunity to use his missiles, because he might have them, right? Although we are just talking about guns only right now, but we are already in a good position. We don't have a significant energy advantage on him anyway, so we need to prioritize position. Because if I was, let's see if we can demonstrate that, if I was to overshoot now, I'm deliberately overshooting now, without a good energy advantage, I have a problem to escape. Okay, you gotta slow down a little bit, try and maneuver hard, so I have an opportunity to overshoot. So he's maneuvering hard, I'm not managing my speed, I get faster. I don't get guns on, And now I'm overshooting his flight path a little bit. Okay, he loses sight. I still haven't overshot. Just go into a hard right-hand turn. Very hard, very hard. Okay, he's pulling hard, he's pulling hard. I'm too fast. See, now I'm starting to overshoot his flight path. And if you reverse now, he could become offensive on me. Look. So you want to be careful with those overshoots. But in this case, because I have energy, that's why we talk about both assets, I can use that energy to maybe reverse the tables again. So I'm using that energy, I go vertical, I know that he's slow because he did a hard maneuver, I'm coming back around over the top, using the tactical egg to fly a tight turn at the top, and there you go. He doesn't have the energy to follow me. We reverse the situation. It's still a kind of high aspect merge here. What we do now is we transition into our maximum rate turn, so we are a bit too fast for that. That means we can still pull the stick harder. We are not slowing down just yet, so we are cutting the throttle. We want to get into a good speed range. It's not coming down yet, cutting the throttle a little more. But you see, as long as I stay fast and he doesn't get the nose around, he's stuck in lag pursuit, he's not an immediate threat. This is much better. We are getting into a better speed range now. Undershot our target a little bit, so we get that speed back up. And you can see here as well the flight path or the turn circle offset, because see, we are getting closer here and we are distancing each other from one another again as we merge. So this tells us we have a turn circle offset. And if we wanted to shoot him eventually, we have to eliminate that. Now we are way too slow for our best rate turn. So let's see that we are building up some speed. Of course, that means that we are opening up the turn. There he is, but we are already coming around a bit better. And opening up that turn at least allowed us to align the turn circles a bit. Now we are above 400, and we can really pull that beast around again. A bit more. We are accelerating a bit more, and there you go. We are getting to better rate turn numbers. He did use some energy because he tried to get the nose around, which tells me that he's slightly slow, and we are just flying a good rate turn, a bit fast actually, so we can pull a bit more. Man, this thing accelerates. Pulling the throttle back again. He's coming forward in our assessment window, which is a winning cue for us. We are winning the rate fight because he's coming forward on the canopy, and as you can see, we don't have that yo-yoing effect anymore, or not as much, which means that our turn circles are aligning again. And now we are back in an offensive position. He noticed that, he's reversing, and now we are visualizing the control zone again and try and stay in that control zone. And this kind of free exercise is just supposed to demonstrate to you how you can build your maneuver flow. You saw how I constantly evaluate the situation, try and make sense of it, and try and devise an action plan of how to deal with that situation, to get back into a good position. So yeah, are there any questions on that right now? I hope I used all the techniques, or we talked about rate fight, we talked about the tactical egg, we talked about geometry, physics. Now here is an example of how to use geometry or an out-of-plane maneuver offensively to avoid the overshoot. I just flew a very aggressive yo-yo maneuver. As you can see, by converting my speed into altitude, I gain some distance on him, and I can come back in a better position. Are you out of fuel? Oh no, the engine just...
No, negative.
Yeah. Yep, that's okay. All right, and we visualized turning room and all of that. So what we do next is to show the same thing from the defensive side. So someone else can take the role of the demonstrator. So yeah,
Yes,
Buis. Oh yeah, I've asked one of you guys. Everyone will get the opportunity to fly a bit. So
where do I have to go?
take the demo FA-18 AIM-9X. Where
Can I take the F-16?
yeah, you can also take the F-16. I think we are in the same spot anyway. So
Do I have to go blue?
blue,
or
yeah, blue. F-16 AIM-9X.
This one here, right?
No,
This one.
blue. You're in red. Up.
Blue.
Yeah.
Demo F-16 AIM-9X.
Yeah. Okay. The constellation that we have now would be that the F-16 is generally better in the raid fight. So when I know this, what I would do in my FA-18, using all the concepts that I've already learned, or that we've talked about, is that I want to do a position fight, a one-circle fight, and try and use that to my advantage. So let's see how that goes. And I'm going to start from the defensive this time. Alright, you can press fly. So let's see that we can find each other. We should actually...
I'm behind you.
Okay, how much?
Just overshot under you.
Okay, I'm turning slightly left so you can come around and I see you. And let me know when you're within 1 or 2 nautical miles so we can begin the exercise. Of course, when it comes to defensive flying, the most important thing is that you identify the threat as early as possible, so you still have some time to do something. So he's already quite close to us, as we are noticing him here, so we have to act quickly. Now, as I've already just said, we want to fly a one-circle flow or a positioning fight, a min-radius fight, because our aircraft should be better at that. So what do you suggest what I do first? We are in this situation, he's following us. If you were me, now this is a question to the audience, what would you do? And when you devise your answer, please give a short explanation using the concepts that we've discussed, if you can. There you go, that's a game plan, so let's try that. Now, the thing is, what we will have to consider, his closure rate is very low. We can see this because his distance to us is not changing very much, okay? So we need to consider that. The lower the closure rate, the more difficult. Now the closure rate is increasing, as you can see he's coming around faster. We talked about line of sight rate. You see how he's maneuvering across our canopy. So if he's maneuvering a lot from here to there, that means the line of sight rate goes up, and that tells you that his closure rate is high, okay? Now, as I said, making someone overshoot with a low closure rate with respect to you is very difficult. So a guy that's actually approaching you fast is much easier to make overshoot, okay? So what we are doing here, instead of just turning horizontally, we try to use the vertical to get out of his guns initially. Now we are already slow and we keep reversing because he doesn't have the guns on, okay? And position wise, we are already moving to his 9-3 line. Now, of course, we are very low on energy at this point, but for now, at least what we achieved is that he's not offensive on us. Okay, he's back there, we reacquired visual, we immediately resume maneuvering with respect to the bandit. We go into a break turn so he can't shoot. Again, we said we don't have missiles, so we wouldn't have to worry about this right now. Obviously, he would have shot at us already. Avoid the nose in the merge. Some people may shoot in this situation. And now we go over the top. We get slow because we know in a one circle we are better. As we are rolling around, we kind of reverse the situation. We are very slow at the moment, so let's build up some speed. Positional wise, we are in a better position than we started, so that's okay. We can lay off a little bit and now stay inside of his turn circle for now and see what he's up to. Now we know he's an F-16, he's still quite fast, he's probably going to outrate us in the long run, but as long as we are offensive here and we kind of keep him now in our assessment window, for now we are safe. We are in a sort of neutral situation, because if you see, if I wanted to pull him into the gun site to get a gun solution, it's not working, right? So now I wasted my energy for nothing. That's why you should be careful with that energy. So you could say in that situation I was actually stuck in lag. I couldn't get the lead required to shoot. And if you get too greedy in the situation, you see what happens. He immediately became kind of offensive on us again because he rated around that turn. So you got to be careful here. We go back into our one circle as we try go over the top. He's coming around over the top, but you see he's keeping our distance to us. So he's using his speed and his advantage in his aircraft, the 2 circle rate turn, to stay away from us. And as you can see, 1 nautical mile is certainly too much for the gun. Well, at 6,000 feet we might be able to get rounds on target, but not at this range. And as you can see, we are again stuck in lag. We can't pull the nose up in front to get a gun solution. Now let's see what happens. I mean, we are in training here. We are building up some speed to get better into a better rate range, to maximize our turn rate. But as you can see, the F-16 is already starting to beat us. We have to maneuver our head further and further behind on our canopy. And if we wait for too long and he's on our 6 o'clock, there's nothing we can do. So we better start reacting now. Now what we can do to kind of try and transition this into one circle, we can either climb, or in this situation what I usually find more suitable is kind of cut into the turn and induce this turn circle offset. And then as we come around from the bottom, Hendrik is kind of freaking me out. We are trying to go over the top, get slow, and get back into an offensive position. So as you can see, although we can't really get into a good guns solution here, at least we keep him at bay. And starting out defensively initially, and now staying more or less neutral all the time. Hang on, I need to quickly fix that. Is better than getting shot at, obviously, right? So this is the priorities we talk about, and you shouldn't be over ambitious or unrealistic. Of course, fighting spirit is important, but you should stay realistic. So if you can't really neutralize, get offensive, that's okay. If you keep it neutral in the first place, that's better than nothing. All right. So that's what your goal would be. All right. Let me get up above these clouds again. So we lost sight, obviously, but our RWR tells us he's behind us. And even though he might be able to see us with the radar when we go through the clouds, we can still obscure our movement a little bit, and might make it a bit more difficult for him to actually see us or shoot at us. Now in this situation, obviously the most important thing is to regain visual as soon as possible. I still don't see him, but you see what I'm doing. I'm just, this is still not working properly. I'm checking my 6, and there I see him. He's pulling lead. I'm doing an out of plane maneuver, and see, overshoot, and there he is. And the only reason why that worked is because I could interpret what his nose is doing. Okay, I knew he's pulling lead, he's trying to go for the gunshot, he had a high closure rate, so I could use this by, so to speak, pulling the brakes, right, and make him overshoot. Probably at this distance he could have fired already before I actually noticed that he was there. but I think for the purpose of this exercise, it was demonstrated quite well how you, in this case, used turning room and create a BFM problem for him to make it difficult. Now, this is also general terminology that you can find. When we talk about BFM maneuvering flow, we talk about BFM problems and solutions. So the one that's defending is usually creating problems. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to make it as hard as I can for him to manage his range angle enclosure, or ergo stay in my control zone. So I'm creating BFM problems. And if he's unable to solve these problems, find solutions to these problems, I'm going to be successful, and I'm going to reverse the situation, and I'm going to kill him eventually. Whereas if he manages to find solutions by managing range angle enclosure range angle enclosure, properly, he will maintain control over that fight. And you can see that the F-16 is still quite good in the slow speed domain, because we are still in a sort of two-circle fight, and these pylons on the FA-18 really wear it down. So I'm really keen on seeing what the new flight model is going to do to it. But at least we can stay inside of his turn circle and not allow him to shoot. Now we start to lose that sort of engagement, so we are bugging out a little bit, gaining energy. We chose that moment because he was closest to us. That means to get back toward us, he needs the longest time. If we choose to bug out at a different point in time, he's much quicker on our 6 o'clock like he is now. So the timing of changing something is really crucial. And we are quite fast now. So you see, as the closure rate is very low, it's much more difficult to make him overshoot. We're still quite fast, but our maneuvering confused him maybe a little bit. So he went up, tried to manage his range angle enclosure again. He's coming around on the other side. We have neutralized the situation. That was a head-on situation, so still neutral, because both could have potentially shot if they chose to do so. And now the tactical egg. Remember, we want to come around the bottom. If we come around the bottom before him, we know we are winning. We get the nose on. He didn't. So we are slightly, we are starting.
Because I'm out of view.
Yeah, but in any case, even if he wasn't, we were starting to win that nose positioning fight. Okay, and that's what the Hornet is actually good at. So, this is how you build your maneuvering flow. All right, since he's out of fuel, we can shorten his suffering here. Actually hit the wing there. Nice. Okay. Any questions on maneuvering at this point and maneuvering flow? So, if not, we can do a quick exercise at the end. So let's take, I have to see on which side this is. Ah, shit, I'm dumb. I put all of them on the same side, and that will cause the us to be kicked because you can't friendly fire. Anyway, what we are going to do to mix things up a bit. No, we still have two that haven't flown. So Buis and Grisu. So you two can take the slots. One of you demo FA-18 under Wasp's name, and the other one under my name, and then you can also do, and we can watch them and see what they do. So Buis, just take the slot underneath of me. And then we do some quick 5 minutes and see how it goes. So you got to go on the red side, Buis. Yeah. Okay.
What was the problem with my next saber?
Yeah.
Not be able to round maybe my 3 o'clock. And,
Yeah. Okay, guys, you can press fly. And let's see who is offensive initially, the one who usually spawned in first. Alright, that would be Grisu. No, I think Grisu. Let's see where they are. Oh. Controls not found properly. Okay, so Buis is offensive because he's behind. Get a bit of distance, Buis, and when you are about 1 nautical mile away from Grisu, call it please, and then say fights on so Grisu knows that he can now maneuver. And let's see how they apply the concepts that we've talked about.
Down like this. Hear anything?
Yeah, no worries. You might want to come off afterburner, Grisu, for now, so you save a bit of fuel. Still in afterburner. There you go. Yeah, and maybe slow down a bit because Buis is falling back. Go to about 400 knots, Grisu. That's gonna be fine for now. A slight left-hand turn so he can Buis can cut in. Buis, you have visual, right, on Grisu? Off the nose. Yes. Grisu, do you see Buis? He is to your 9 o'clock. If yes, then you can be offensive for now, that's okay. And while Buis is figuring out. And position yourself such that you're about 1 nautical mile behind him. Full afterburner. No, he's not. That's fine. Alright. So you see, he started maneuvering early. So initially Grisu is trying to get closer, get in guns range. Starting to try to pull lead, but it didn't work. And you can see what the effect of reducing the turning room is. You saw Buis here reducing the turning room quite effectively. So Grisu almost overshot his flight path, but he's still at a good distance, so he can manage. If you see that Buis is still somewhere above Grisu's canopy bow, you can clearly tell that he's in the control zone. But here you go. Focused on the shot, not managing the speed. Overshot, and now position-wise it's reversed. So if Buis still has the energy to go after Grisu at this point, he's got to be careful. So what Buis wants to do is, because he knows now positional-wise he's in the advantage position, to stay in lag pursuit, build up some energy, to make it difficult for Grisu to reverse that, because as you can see, what Grisu did is what I did before as well, use the energy to get away and get into a good position again. But Buis managed his energy very well and stayed on positional wise on the offensive. And now as we are getting closer to the deck, and you can see how quickly that works, that Grisu is climbing a bit, so we're not going into a deck transition at this time. But you saw what happened when WASP and I went low. As soon as we were on the deck, things got hairy a bit. Alright, so he's up here, going into a maximum rate turn. Speed looks good. I must say I did lose sight on Buis a little bit, but he is, yeah, there he is, over the city, low. Do we have labels actually? Don't know if I enabled it. So yeah, he's somewhere to Grisu's 7 to 8 o'clock low, and Grisu has the speed or altitude advantage and can use his energy to reset that fight. So he's resetting now. He's going over the top and trying to get back onto Buse 6. And there's not much else Buse can do than predict that this is happening and prepare for the defense, because he doesn't have the energy to climb up the tree. So now the clouds, I think, help Buse to stay undetected in terms of, okay, it was difficult for Grisu to maintain visual for this attack, because he came down. He was obviously trying to attack, but when he reached the clouds, there was no target in front of him. So, yeah. But what he's doing is the correct thing. So he's maneuvering not too tightly, but still maneuvering just in case something's coming up on his 6 o'clock. And he's now diving toward the clouds, so probably got a radar lock on Buse. I don't know exactly because he's not behind him. Let's see how this turns out. Do you guys have visual on one another, I wonder? Let's check the map then. So Grisu is slightly higher, head on. He's maneuvering with respect to the bandit, so obviously you can see him. You see that Grisu is fast, so he's trying to make him overshoot by reversing the turn, which was partially successful. Yeah, kind of successful. There you go. He maintains that turn, I suppose. Struggled to maintain visual there. Grisu stays in the 2 circle. Keeps using his energy to his advantage, so this is good. It's actually a principle that we are going to talk about next time, how to conserve energy, you know, yo-yo maneuver and so on and so forth, but this is already a good demonstration of this. And you see the geometry though. This is a very steep angle, but good shot here. He had a long time to aim. Did he actually hit, or was this just because you pulled the throttle? I don't know if that was... okay. Are you still okay, or are you dead? Yeah. So I think the the problem here was that the Buse got a bit slow, I suppose, and couldn't jinx out of the way before Grisu got the shot on. So you can see how the transition from lead to lag pursuit happened here, and of course at the larger distance this is much more difficult to spot. Now, what you have to take into consideration is that the FA-18's gun is canted upwards about 15 degrees. That's a huge advantage. So the gun is already pulling 15 degrees of lead. So in certain situations, the FA-18 doesn't even pull lead, or doesn't need to pull lead to get the guy on, you know, into its sights. So when you fight the FA-18, you got to take this into consideration. When an FA-18 goes into pure pursuit, you already got to be careful, because you might be able to shoot depending on the distance. Okay, I think that's something that we saw here, and that's very unique to the FA-18. I don't know another fighter jet where this is the case, but this is certainly something that you need to consider. If you want to do one quick one again, go ahead. This time you will be closer. Will take less time for you. Just reslot and get back in, the 2 of you that just flew. And I should disable the head tracking for the externals. Let's do just that. Let me know when you're back in. Okay, Grisu is
ready.
right. Okay. Did you leave the server?
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah, I did accidentally.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Then I go in. It's okay.
Okay.
So Alright, you can join. Press fly.
Ja, ich bin schon drin.
Ah ja,
Komm
okay.
raus.
Ja, genau. Geh nochmal raus, dann, dann muss ich mein Head-Tracking wieder an. Ja, ja, kannst du. Du solltest mich vor dir sehen, in front of you. Okay. Right, so there he is. Closure rate is not very high. Now, when we talk about going into the vertical, that's something that we did because we can use geometry, right? I'm showing you why going upwards might not be the best option. We are going upwards, and as you can see, we can still have the nose on us. So especially if the guy is, if the closure rate is low, and he's at a good distance to you, and you start pulling up, you usually get yourself killed. Okay, so you shouldn't do that. In this situation, what's always better and much more difficult to deal with is if you go downwards. If you want to do a vertical maneuver. If a guy is approaching you from above and he's very fast, you can of course pull up because that decreases the turning room for him. But in this situation, when he's very close on you, or not very close on your 6 o'clock, and he's got a low closure rate, you don't wanna pull up, because he could have easily shot at me, I suppose, when I did that. So now we are in a neutral situation. We assess the situation real quick. He's above us, I think that's him. Where's that a star? That's a cloud, isn't it? Ah yeah, he's to our 6 o'clock. Alright, there he is, 6 low. Okay, what do we see? Closure rate not very high. He's about to pull some lead, so we might be careful because of a gunshot. He's maybe just in range to land some rounds on target, but it's certainly time to maneuver and to be careful. Now, in terms of turning room, we learned that we want to be defensive. When we are defensive, we want to decrease turning room. Which direction do I turn? He's slightly to the left of me. Do I turn right? Sorry, he's slightly to the right of me. Obviously, I'm looking behind. Do I turn right? Do I turn left? Or do I go straight up? Although that we've already talked about is not a good idea. Let's say we only have the option to turn left and right. Which direction do I turn to minimize his turning room? Left or right? Yeah, always into the bandit. Because if I turn out away from him, see, he's overshooting my flight path. If I turn away from him, I'm opening up actually, and I reduce angle, I increase turning room, and it makes it easier for him to shoot me actually. So that's what I gotta be careful about, okay? Always turn into the bandit to decrease turning room when you're defensive. In other words, this is something that you can expect when you are offensive, okay? You can expect them to turn into you, especially if you know that you fly against a good guy, or you just always assume that the other guy knows what he's doing, and then that's just something that you assume, okay? And then you can map out the trajectory, what's going to happen, and you know what's going to happen, right? So you can adjust your maneuvering accordingly so you don't get surprised like this, and you try and avoid the overshoot. Okay, let's reset. Yep, I'm resetting, so you can just come around and get my 6 o'clock again. And let's illustrate this one more time, incorporating the vertical, and how this additionally helps to make it a more difficult BFM problem. I think now you probably lost me, didn't you? I'm just, yeah, just come above the clouds. I'm just turning around here. Above the clouds. Yeah, I think I see you. I'm to your 11 o'clock-ish co-altitude now. I'm going straight. Okay, yeah, I'm turning left a little bit so you can get back into an offensive position. Alright, so I'm Going straight now. Okay, there he is. See, if we see him now, what we do is obviously we turn into him. Because see, if we turn away from him, we open up. We actually make it easier for him to follow us and to get into a position. Now he's got very high closure rate, so we roll a bit over. We still maintain a bank toward him, not fully down. There is the flight path overshoot. You can see that from the line of sight movement, right? He's going across the canopy, and that means we can reverse, and the reverse is most likely going to be successful. We are now in a one circle, so we want to minimize the radius. A bit late on pushing back the afterburner. Oh, he pulled the pedal switch there, didn't you? Because the nose came around quite suddenly, but he didn't just have enough lead to pull. But you see how little lead the nose of the Hornet actually pulls because of that canted cannon. So we really got to be careful. And now we are spiraling down to the deck. Now we need to prepare for the deck transition. He figured he needs to go into it first, which is okay. He's a bit fast, so he can gain some ground. We are a bit slow, but we still had a little bit of positional advantage, so that's okay. We now have to build the speed. We are going into a two-circle rate fight now, and you see, because he went into a deck transition at a proper timing, he's almost back offensive as we came around, although I was almost offensive on him as we went downhill. So this is why the deck transition is very important, and you need to anticipate it. We have a large turn circle offset. He's overshooting the flight path. Now that was probably a bit early on the reversal, and you can see why. He's coming around and he might get a shot there. So we've got to make sure we come over the top quickly. Oh, this is a... yeah. This is why head-on situations you obviously want to avoid, because both can potentially shoot. So, and I got slightly hit there, but I think I can still fly. So, back into the one circle flow. We know this because the noses are coming around. I'm a bit slower. His nose is coming around, so I'm preparing for the defense because I know I can't pull around. Guns jinx a little bit. Just anything to throw his aim off and get back immediately into the game. Now we are winning the turn. This time he can't get the nose around. We can. We just missed. And we are going over the top to cut into his turn circle to stay keep an offensive position. And now we need to gain that energy back, the knots back, because we are getting back into a rate fight. And I assume he has slightly higher speed right now, so we need to get that back. Use the vertical gravity to pull us around, and now we are trying to get the knots back. Just around 360 as we talked about. There you go. Then we can adjust our bank angle, lift vector control, lift vector placement. We roll further into the turn as we get faster. There you go. 400 turn rates coming up. We can pull the stick almost into the stomach. There you go. Reverse the turn, and because we are already at the deck, there's not much he can do now. Okay, pull the throttle a little bit. He's trying to go back into the one circle, try and make us overshoot. We pulled the throttle, so we stay in control with regards to range. Don't get too slow, because we will get back into the two circle. Let jet drive around. He's still slow, we can tell. We stay in lag pursuit to build up the speed, because we prepare for the two circle again, because that's what happens. There's not much we can do else, because the ground is getting close. Now he's trying to collapse into the turn. If we follow him, we are going to die. We are going to hit the ground, so we maintain our two circle. Because you see, although it seems like he's becoming offensive, it's not the case, because he's got to recover from that dive, and we maintain our energy. Two circle game plan. Climb above his nose. He can't shoot us. Perfect. Try to get back into a good speed range, and just slowly rate behind him again. Everything under control. But this is something, especially toward the deck, you got to be careful. If we were a bit higher, I could have followed him, but in this situation, it would have probably killed me, so I didn't. And I rather prepare for my two circle flow again and get my rate speeds up and rate myself back behind him, because now we are very low. he cannot again collapse into the turn like he did before. So we are just getting into a good position here. Now of course in a 2 circle we got to be patient, because if we fly the same jet potentially we can fly the same rate turns, but generally speaking he's to the forward quarter of our canopy the entire time as we go around the turn. So we are definitely offensive and we are getting the winning cues here. We have a slight turn circle offset because we still have this yo-yoing effect going on. We can pull a bit tighter. So we are pulling a bit tighter here just to make sure we're not losing any ground. Aha, there you go. He's going up. And you see how this helps us getting closer. We are visualizing this control zone, which is kind of behind his jet. That's where we are staying. We're not pulling too aggressively. And that's the moment we were waiting for. Okay, the clouds messed that up a little bit, but okay. You can still see him. Or not. There he is, locked still. I hope that's accurate. We are both very slow, so be careful with that speed. Ah, there he is. There he is, slow in front of us. There you go. That was just barely scratched the wing there. Lucky for me, but we could have easily corrected that if we missed. Just climb slightly above and come back down. Okay, so that's why when you reverse, you gotta be careful. You gotta have reversal cues met. But we talk about this during defensive BFM anyway, and I think that's part of the advanced course. All right, yeah, that's all I wanted to show you today.
Thank you very much. That was good.
All right, quick debriefing. All right, Krisu.
Yep.
Just
So, ich habe gerade die Brille abgenommen.
just give us a quick feedback on the lesson.
Yeah, the end was really good and was really fun to fly, and was really interesting to hear what I was actually doing, how that is called. Because that, I don't know normally the words for that, but that was really fun. And to get a one-out shot on you was very fun.
Yeah. That's why you should avoid the head-on, huh?
Yeah.
Very good, very good. All right, Buse.
Well, thanks a lot. That was a great session as always. What else can I say? I need to work on my spotting here. Not so much experience in the Hornet yet, but or adjust my settings or something. I always lose visual in BFM here. So far.
Yep. I know it's a pain in the beginning, but you will get there. Vasp.
Yeah, nice theoretical refresher at the beginning of the lesson. And I learned specifically for the F-16 that it's very fast out of gas.
Yeah.
I don't know how this compares to the Hornet, but
Oh, I was still good on fuel.
yeah. So you were an afterburner.
Yeah, most of the time.
Yeah. So that's really something that you have to consider when you fly the F-16, especially. But other than that, it was nice to see those two aircraft compare in the 1 and 2 circle fight. Yeah, interesting opponents. F-16 versus F-18.
Yeah. Yeah, the thing was, as you got lighter faster than I did, I noticed that. So in both domains, you started to gain ground on me because, as you said, you were almost out of gas, and I think I was still halfway, or maybe 30%. So that's
yeah. Crazy.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you. And Italian Marine.
For me, it was really interesting. Well, I had a little bit of technical issues with my neck saver because I wasn't able to watch completely in my back. So, but to see then the other fights, like the evasive maneuver and
that's something else which was really helpful, like turning into the guy, into the basket, and yeah, I hope to learn even more defensive maneuvers.
Yep.
And also offensive, yes. I mean, but the best thing is to learn first, even to fly defensively, as you said, to stay alive. That's
Yep.
the first thing.
And that's what you're going to experience the most, especially when you begin and you fly against a good pilot. But that's what you learn, as you said, where you learn the most. But I can tell you this much, because all of you are World War II flyers or prop flyers, where BFM is daily business. The skill level within this workshop is already higher than it was in the previous one, because most of these guys didn't have any experience with BFM whatsoever. Usually no prop experience, no PvP experience, and that shows. And you can see how this translates across airframes, right? Whether you fly a Mustang, a BF-109, or an FA-18, the principal concepts still apply, and that's great.
Yep.
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 All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I'm looking forward to the next session. I've recorded everything, so over the course of the week, the video will be available for debriefing, if you will. Okay.
Thank you very much
Next
for the lesson.
lesson is next week or
In 2 weeks. It's always 2 weeks.
in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gives you enough time to, digest what you've learned and maybe
Yes, and
practice. Yes.
Practice it, yes.
Yeah, and have time to watch the video and maybe see, okay, I saw this now, or maybe even spot the mistakes that I make, now that you learn the concepts, look at it again and be like, this could have been done better. Everybody makes mistakes, so that's why we record the sessions. All right, that's it for me, gentlemen. See you next time.